Hello, my name is Ndrmp. So I will be presenting to you the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan, the Ndrmp from 2011 to 2020. So this is the executive summary of the Ndrmp. So the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan, the Ndrmp, fulfills the requirement of Republic Act No. 10121 of 2010, which provides the legal basis for policies, plans, and programs to deal with disaster. The Ndrmp covers 4 thematic areas, namely the disaster prevention and mitigation, disaster preparedness, disaster response, and disaster and rehabilitation and recovery, which correspond to the structure of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, the Ndrmc. By law, the Office of Civil Defense formulates and implements the Ndrmp and ensures that the physical framework, social and economic and environmental plans of communities, cities, municipalities, and provinces are consistent with such plan. The Ndrmp is consistent with the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Framework, Ndrmf, which serves as the principal guide to disaster risk reduction and management, the DRRM, efforts to the country. The framework envisions a country of safer, adaptive, and disaster-resilient Filipino community towards sustainable development. It conveys a paradigm shift from reactive to proactive DRRM, wherein men and women have increased their awareness and understanding of DRRM, with the end of view of increasing people's resilience and decreasing their vulnerabilities. National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan from 2011 to 2020. The Ndrmp sets down the expected outcomes, outputs, key activities, indicators, lead agencies, implementing partners, and timelines under each of the 4 distinct yet mutually reinforcing thematic areas. To further discuss the thematic areas, let's hear from Ms. Misagal.
This is Christine Misagal, and I will be talking about the first thematic area, or called the disaster prevention and mitigation. The overall responsible agency of this area is the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST. In this area, the long-term goal is to avoid hazards and mitigate their potential impacts by reducing vulnerabilities and exposure and enhancing capacities of communities. Its objectives include reducing vulnerability and exposure of communities to all hazards, and enhancing capacities of communities to reduce their own risks and cope with the impacts of all hazards. Of course, to achieve these objectives, the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Plan identified outcomes. The first one is the Disaster Risk Reduction Management and Climate Change Adaptation, mainstreamed and integrated in national, sectoral, regional, and local development policies, plans, and budget. This is led by the Office of Civil Defense, or OCD. This means that disaster risk reduction management is not and should not be a standalone program in any government or country. It should be integrated and mainstreamed into national and local policies, plans, and programs, including budgets. The second outcome is disaster risk reduction management and climate change adaptation sensitive environmental management. This is led by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or DENR. Disaster risk reduction should be an integral objective of environmental related policies and plans, including for land use, natural resource management, and adaptation to climate change. The third outcome is increased disaster resiliency of infrastructure systems. This is led by the Department of Public Works and Highways, or DPWH. Urban disasters are among the country's growing concerns in disaster risk reduction management, with the exponential increase of poor people living in highly congested urban communities surrounded by old, unstable, and highly vulnerable things and buildings. Attention to how risks can be reduced in infrastructure systems need to be amplified. The fourth outcome is enhance and effective community-based and scientific disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation assessment, mapping, analysis, and monitoring. This is led by the Office of Civil Defense. To be a more effective guide in national and local planning, a combination of community-based and scientific disaster risk reduction, management, and climate change adaptation, hazard and risk mapping will be a priority. Through this, not only will the findings be validated, communities will be able to participate and take part in knowing about the different factors which increase their risks and exposure to disasters, as well as be involved in the process of assessment, analysis, and the conduct of monitoring activities. The fifth outcome is communities have access to effective and applicable disaster risk financing and insurance. Risk transfer mechanisms through disaster risk financing and insurance contributes to the prevention and mitigation of disasters, especially at the community level. Through this, their vulnerabilities are lessened through the options and buffers available for them. This is led by the Department of Finance. The sixth outcome is end-to-end monitoring, forecasting, and early warning systems are established and or improved, and this is led by the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST. As defined under Public Act 10121, EWS is the set of capacities needed to generate and disseminate timely and meaningful warning information to enable individuals, communities, and organizations threatened by a hazard to prepare and to act appropriately and in sufficient time to reduce the possibility of harm and loss. End-to-end warning systems is emphasized, which incorporates all steps from hazard detection to community response.
Thank you, Ms. Misaga, and I am Omanya, and I'm going to discuss the thematic area 2, which is about disaster preparedness. The overall responsible agency for this thematic area is the Department of Interior and Local Government, or the DILG. So for the first outcome in this thematic area is the increased level of awareness and enhanced capacity of the community to the threats and impacts of all hazards. The leading agency for this outcome is the Philippine Information Agency, or the PIA. The second outcome in this thematic area is that communities are equipped with necessary skills and capability to cope up with the impacts of the disasters. The leading agencies for this outcome are the Department of Local and Interior Government and the OCD, or the Office of Civil Defense. As for the third outcome on this thematic area is the increased DRRM and CCA capacity of local DRRM councils, offices, and operation centers at all levels. The leading agency for this outcome is the DILG. As for the fourth outcome of this thematic area, developed and implemented comprehensive national and local preparedness and response policies, plans, and systems. And the leading agencies for this outcome is the DILG and the OCD. As for the fifth and final outcome of this thematic area is the strengthened partnership and coordination among all key players and stakeholders. The leading agency for this outcome is the DILG. Now, to continue on the thematic area 3, I would like to call on Ms. Peñalosa to discuss further.
So thank you, Mr. Omanya. So hi everyone, I'm Ms. Peñalosa and I'm here to discuss about the thematic area 3, or the disaster response. So here is the outcome of thematic area 3. So first is well-established disaster response operation, adequate and prompt assistance of needs and damages at all levels, integrated and coordinated search, and the SRR capacity. And next is safe and timely evacuation of affected communities, temporary shelter needs adequately addressed, Next is basic social services provided to affected population. And second to the last is the psychosocial needs of directly and indirectly affected population addressed. And lastly is coordinated integrated system for early recovery implemented. And the overall responsible agency will be the DSWD. So the disaster response pertains to the provision of emergency services and public assistance during or immediately after a disaster in order to save lives, reduce health impacts, ensure public safety, and meet the basic subsistence needs of the people affected. So disaster responders work to ensure the safety and security of communities during emergencies. So that's all for the Thematic Area 3, and the next reporter will be Mr. Portarcos.
Thank you, Ms. Pedroza. To continue the Thematic Area for Disaster Rehabilitation and Recovery, the overall responsible agency is the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. So to continue the outcome, the damages, losses, and the needs assessed is the lead agency is the OCD. And the next is the economic activities restored and if possible strengthened or expanded, and the lead agency is to be determined based on the affected sectors. So next is the houses rebuilt or repaired to be more resilient to hazard events or safer sites for housing, and the lead agency is the National Housing Authority, or the NHA. And the next is the disaster and climate change resilient infrastructure constructed or reconstructed, and the lead agency is the DPWH. And the next is the psychologically sound, safe, and secure citizenry that is protected from the effects of disasters, is able to restore to normal functioning after the disaster. And the lead agency is the DOH and the DSWD. The Ndrmp is a roadmap on how DRRM shall contribute to gender-responsive and rights-based sustainable development. Highlights include the need of institutionalizing DRRM policies, structures, coordination mechanisms, and programs with continuing budget appropriation on DRR from national down to local levels. Thus, several activities will strengthen the capacity of the personnel of national government and the local government units, or the LGUs. And partner stakeholders build the disaster resilience of communities and institutionalize arrangements and measures for reducing disaster risk and including climate risk. So next is the importance of mainstreaming DRM and CCA in the development processes such as policy formulation, socio-economic development planning, budgeting, and governance, particularly in the area of environment, agriculture, water, energy, health, education, poverty reduction, land use and urban planning, and public infrastructure and housing, and among others. And next is the competency and science-based capacity building activities alongside the nurturing of continuous learning through knowledge development and management of good DRRM practices on the ground. And so the last one is the inclusion of human-induced disasters that result in internally displaced person, public anxiety, loss of lives, destruction of property, and sometimes socio-politically stability and encompassing conflict resolution approaches. The plan seeks to mainstream DRRM into the peace process. The Ndrmp is guided by good governance principles within the context of poverty alleviation and environmental protection. It is about partnerships towards effective delivery of services to the citizenry, working together through complementation of resources, thus harnessing and mobilizing the participation of civil society organizations, or the CSOs, the private sector, and the volunteers of the government. DRRM programs and projects is part of the parcel of the plan. Efforts were made to align the Ndrmp with national plans such as the Philippine Development Plan, National Climate Change Action Plan, and the National Security Policy, such that DRRM activities are integrated with budget allocation by relevant government line agencies. Specific DRRM-related activities are undertaken using timelines that will help national leaders and local chief executives to ensure completion within their terms. To further explain the timelines, here is Ms. Kila.
So thank you, Mr. Portarcos. In continuation of Ndrmp, so I'll be presenting to you about timelines. In general, the set of activities are divided into 3 timelines. First is the short term, which is from 2011 to 2013, and the next one is the medium term, which is from 2014 to 2016, and the last one is the long term, which is from 2017 and 2018. In the medium term, Ndrmp shall have contributed to meeting the commitments under the Millennium Development Goals and Global Framework for Action. The activities identified under the short and medium term coincide with the complementary targets made under the Philippine Development Plan 2011-2016. The long-term activities and projects are expected to be completed at the same time as the National Climate Change Action Plan to reinforce the convergence of these 2 plans. For the thematic areas 3 and 4, operational timelines are indicated in the plan. The use of operational timelines is deemed useful at the local level during actual operations and response. Rehabilitation and recovery. If the activities last beyond 6 years for rehabilitation and recovery, the duration considered long-term. So in the area of disaster response, the maximum timeline is beyond 3 months. So here is Mr. Romania to present the Ndrmp priority projects.
Thank you, Ms. Kilab, and I am Romania. I'm going to discuss the Ndrmp priority projects. To fast-track the implementation of the Ndrmp, priority projects and demonstration sites are identified. The purpose is to either replicate good DRRM practices or implement projects in areas which need them most. All priority projects are to be implemented within the immediate or short-term period from 2011 to 2013. The priority projects of the Ndrmp are: first, the development of the following plans. First is the plan for Joint Work Plan for DRRM and CCA. Second is the plan for local DRRM plans. Third is the plan for National Disaster Response Plan. Fourth is the plan for risk financing. The second priority project of the Ndrmp is the development of IEC and advocacy materials on Public Act 10121, DRRM, and CCA. As for the third priority project of the Ndrmp, is the development of guidelines on communications and information protocol before, during, and after disasters. Next is the development of guidelines on creation of DRRM teams. Next is the guidelines on criteria standards for local flood early warning systems. Next is the guidelines on evacuation. Next is the guidelines on infrastructure redesign or modifications. And lastly is the guidelines on manual of operations of disasters operations centers. The fourth priority project of the Ndrmp is the development of tools on DRRM and CCA mainstreaming in the national and local level planning. Next is the development of tools on damage and needs assessments and post-damage and needs assessments. Also, the development of tools on psychosocial concerns. The fifth priority project of the Ndrmp is the establishment of DRRM training institutes. Next is the establishment of local flood early warning systems. Third is the establishment of end-to-end early warning systems in provinces of Bulacan, Leyte, Albay, municipalities of Quicharao and Santiago, Agusan del Norte, and Butuan City. The sixth priority project of the Ndrmp is the establishment of local DRRM councils and offices and their operation centers. As prescribed by the Republic Act 1012, the seventh priority project of the Ndrmp is to conduct an inventory of existing DRRM and CCA resources and services. The eighth priority project of the Ndrmp is the development and implementation of DRRM and CCA activities using 5% of the government agency's allocation from the annual national budget or General Appropriations Act. The ninth priority project of the Ndrmp is the hazard and risk mapping in the most high-risk areas in the country. The 10th priority project of the Ndrmp is the institutional capability program on DRRM and CCA for decision makers, public sector employees, and key stakeholders. The 11th priority project of the Ndrmp is the mainstreaming DRRM and CCA. The 12th priority project of the Ndrmp is the PDNA capacity building for national government agencies, regional line agencies, and local offices. The 13th and the last priority project of the Ndrmp is to review, amend, or revise the following. First is the building code and integrate DRRM and CCA. Second is the Executive Number 72 Series of 1993, which provides for the preparation and implementation of the CLUPs of the local government units. Third is to review the implementing rules and regulations of Republic Act number 10121. And lastly, various environmental policies to integrate DRRM and CCA. To discuss further on the implementation of the Ndrmp, I would like to call on Ms. Santos.
So, thank you, Mr. Umanya. So, hi everyone, I am Ms. Santos and I am here to discuss about the implementation of the Ndrrm. So, at the national level, implementation of the Ndrmp shall take place through the integration of DRRM into relevant national plans such as the Philippine Development Plan, as well as through the development and implementation of respective action plans of the government agency for their respective activities as indicated in the Ndrrm. So, as explicitly stated under Republic Act 10121, the Ndrmc has the overall responsibility of approving the Ndrmp and ensuring that it is consistent with the Ndrmf. So it has also been the main responsibility of coordination, integration, supervision, and monitoring the development and enforcement by agencies and organizations of the various laws. So plans, programs, guidelines, code, or technical standards required by the Act, managing and mobilizing resources for DRRM, including the National DRRM Fund, monitoring and providing the necessary guidelines and procedure on the local DRRM Fund, releases as well as the utilization, accounting, and auditing thereof. So within the Ndrmc, 4 committees will be established to deal with the 4 thematic areas set forth in the RRMP and the Ndrmf. So following RA 10121, the overall lead or focal agency for each of the 4 priority areas are the Vice Chairperson of the Ndrmc namely. So first is the Vice Chairperson for Disaster Prevention and Mitigation, or which we call the OST, Department of Science and Technology. Second is the Vice Chairperson for Disaster Preparedness, Department of Interior and Local Government, or the DILG, Vice Person for Disaster Response, Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD, Vice Chairperson for Rehabilitation and Recovery, National Economic and Development Authority, or NED. In addition, the Office of Civil Defense has the main responsibility of ensuring the implementation and monitoring of the Ndrmp. Specifically, it is tasked to conduct periodic assessment and performance monitoring of member agency of the Ndrmc and the RDRRMCs as indicated in the Ndrmp. So it is also responsible for asserting that the physical framework, social, economic, and environmental plans of communities, cities, municipalities, and provinces are consistent with the Ndrmp. So OCD is also tasked to make sure that all DRR programs, projects, and activities requiring regional and international support shall be in accordance with duly established national policies and aligned with international agreements. So at the regional and local levels, the OCD needs to review and evaluate the local DRRM plans to facilitate the integration of DRR measures into the Local Comprehensive Development Plan or CDP and the Comprehensive Land Use Plan or CLUP. So agency leads and implementing partner organizations and or groups are identified in the RRMP to ensure the effective implementation of the Ndrmp. Lead agencies and implementing partners shall work together to identify specific programs and projects and pin down specific budgets to effect better DRRM investments and synergy between government programs. The Ndrmp also outlines the rules of the national government, the Ndrmc, OCD, the Regional Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. So the local disaster risk reduction and management offices and the provincial, city, municipal disaster risk reduction and management councils. An important link in the national local chain or the regional disaster risk reduction and management councils and the local DRRMC. So the DRRMC shall take the overall lead in ensuring that DRRM sensitive regional development plans contribute and are aligned with the Ndrmp. So local DRRMP plans, which OCD is tasked to evaluate and ensure that DRR measures are incorporated into the Comprehensive Development Plan. And the Comprehensive Land Use Plan of the local government units, the LDRRMPs shall develop by the local DRRM offices at the provincial, city, and municipal levels and the barangay development councils. So these offices shall play a critical role in attaining community resilience against disaster. So the next topic will be discussed by Ms. Tomakas.
Hello everyone, I am Tomakas and I am here to discuss about resource mobilization. At the national and local levels, the following sources can be tapped to fund the various DRRM programs and projects. First, General Appropriations Act or GAA. Through the existing budgets of the national line and government agencies. Second, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund or NDRRMF. Third, Local Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund or LDRRMF. Fourth, Priority Development Assistance Fund or PDAF. Fifth, Donor Funds. Sixth, Adaptation and Risk Financing. Lastly, Disaster Management Assistance Fund or DMAF. Aside from the fund sources, the Ndrmp will also tap into the non-monetary resources available which can help attain the targets identified in this plan, namely community-based good practices for replication and scaling up. Next, indigenous practices on DRRM. Then, public-private partnerships. Lastly, DRR and CCA networks of key stakeholders.
Thank you, Ms. Tomakas. I am Villanueva and I will be reporting monitoring and evaluation. Result-based programming shall be used in ensuring that implementation is on time and learning from experiences is built into the DRRM system. The OCD shall develop a standard monitoring and evaluation template together with the technical management group. The stepwise monitoring and evaluation process includes the LGU, the regional and national levels. To monitor and evaluate, the indicators will be used against the targets and activities identified in each of the 4 thematic areas of the Ndrmp, with the aid of the identified means of verification. The annual reporting is done by the Ndrrmc through the OCD to the Office of the President, Senate, and the House Representatives within the quarter of the succeeding year. The HFA Monitor online tool will also be used by the Ndrmc as a working format to undertake the national multi-stakeholder consultation processes as progress is reviewed and challenges are systematically identified. That would be all for my report.